today's short meditation, let us turn our pages to Luke chapter 22, verses 54 to 62. Here in this chapter we see how Peter denies Jesus. And today we'll be looking into the anatomy of a failure. Like what caused Peter to fail or to deny Jesus. We see it was not a sudden decision that he started to deny, but a slowly gradual progression we see in Peter. Here Peter's situation, we can compare it to a frog. When we see a frog, it is a very cold-blooded creature. It can correspond its body temperature to the temperature around it. So when a frog is in a boiling pot, in a hot water, it will not know it is boiling because the frog's body will automatically change it to make cool. And by the time the frog realizes it is boiling, it will die. So frog will not have that sense of it is in a boiling pot, in a hot water, because its skin corresponds to the temperature, making it cool. By the time it realizes it's in the hot water, it will die. In a much similar way, we see Peter's spiritual crash, just like his spiritual crash down like this frog. When we see it didn't just happen like that, but when we see Peter's fall or Peter's spiritual crash, we see it gradually declines. We see how the apostle yielded to the circumstances that caused his downfall. Like even before he denied Jesus, we see how in the upper room, in before chapters, we see he was very overconfident. In the upper rooms, he was very overconfident. And then in the garden where he has to pray, he slept. And he denied that Jesus will die. Like he didn't believe, he couldn't take it that Jesus will suffer. And further we see as soldiers arrested Jesus, and we see how he drew his sword through the high priest servants here. And when finally we see how he denies Christ in this chapter, we see when a maid recognizes him, he denies that he was with Jesus. So it didn't happen at that moment when the maid saw him, but we see gradually coming down. He couldn't believe that Jesus will suffer and he will die, but it is just like his atmosphere couldn't correspond to the reality what is happening. Like we see how the frog couldn't realize it's in the hot water. We see how slowly his downfall is happening. And we see that Peter's denial was not at that moment, but it was in a traumatic experience. Like it reflects as a trauma. We're not being untrue to the Lord. And similarly, our failures, and just like Peter's, are usually followed with a gradual pattern. Like it doesn't happen directly, but gradually. Just like Peter, even our failures, when we have a downfall, it comes in a pattern where gradually in a decline pattern. It doesn't happen sudden, but this gradually downfall appears when we have our self-condemnation of ourselves, when we are being untrue to the Lord, untrue to our God. Like just how Peter was very self-condemnating himself when he was untrue to God. Even in our failures, when we try to be not true to God, we try to self-condemn ourselves. So we may not be worthy or like that. But when we see in this downfall, when we are having this gradual pattern of our downfall, of our failures, of our situation, that is why it is very important to depend on our God every day. And we need to acknowledge our dependence on God. And we have to obey His word every day. And that is the only way that could get out of us with our cold heart. Maybe the frog had cold blood, but we may go through our cold heart. And when we acknowledge our dependence on God, and when we obey His word, that is the only way that could make our cold heart warm. And it will make us to realize that we are in the hot water. We are boiling. Rather, we need to come out of it and depend on God. So I hope everyone who are facing with the failures or self-condemnating ourselves and trying to be very untrue to God, we need to learn to depend on God and acknowledge the dependence on Him and to obey Him.